The coffee machine hissed, the way city buses sigh at red lights. I was new, flustered, and pretending not to be, clutching a stack of onboarding forms like a life raft. Jason appeared beside me with a patient smile and a stapler, as if calm could be handed over like office supplies. He showed me which portals mattered, which meetings didn't, and how to survive a spreadsheet that looked like a maze. I remember thinking, he isn't trying to impress anyone. That was refreshing. Or dangerous. Which one do you think it is? At first, we were just small talk on neutral ground. Printer jams. Lunch options. Whether that couldn't decide what season to be. He had the steady energy of someone who trains before sunrise. The kind of posture that says, I know where my edges are. He never hovered. He showed me the ropes, then stepped back. That distance made me lean in. Coffee after work turned into drives along the lake at night, windows cracked, the wind catching our words and dragging them past the dashboard. We built rituals without announcing them. Friday takeout. Sunday waffles. Anytime eggs. We cooked shoulder to shoulder, never splitting tasks by gender, just by rhythm. He handled the heat. I handled the timing. We fit without effort, like two clean puzzle pieces that had been waiting in different boxes. He didn't drink. Not even a toast. At work events, he raised a glass of soda and smiled. When people asked, he kept it simple. Training. My body doesn't like alcohol. He said it with a tone that closed the door gently. I liked that discipline. I told myself it meant peace. 14 months in, we moved into a small place that looked better at night, with lamps on and music low. The city sounded busy through our windows, but our rooms stayed quiet. It felt like a place that could hold a life. We made plans on sticky notes. Groceries. Savings. Future trips we might take when our schedules made peace with each other. My parents invited him for dinner, an ordinary suburban evening that tried to be special. My mom, Linda, set out the good plates and called it just casual. My dad, Mark, did that classic dad thing where he asked about operations and metrics, and Jason lit up in the calm way he always did. He was polite without being stiff. He listened more than he talked. I watched my parents soften to him the way ice melts along the edges first. Everything was warm until my mom asked about his family. It wasn't an interrogation. Just a natural step in the small dance parents do with the person you might marry. He froze, just for a second, like someone hit pause. It was so fast you could miss it if you weren't in love with the person's face. Then he smiled and said his relatives were in another part of Indiana, and he didn't see them much. His voice stayed even, but something inside it flinched. He steered the conversation back to my dad's job. Forecasting. Logistics. Safer words that didn't bleed. I knew the technique. Redirect, smooth, move on. It worked on everyone at the table, except me. I felt the shift like a draft through a closed window. He wasn't evasive, he was fortified. There's a difference. Driving home, the air in the car felt too clean. He squeezed my hand at a stoplight, and I squeezed back because that's what we did. But my mind kept replaying the pause before his answer, the shadow in it, the way a word like family collapsed on his tongue. Why would a good man lock a door so tight and pretend the hallway never existed? Later that week, my mom called me, voice bright and hopeful, and talked wedding plans. A simple reception, a dance, a toast. Nothing huge, she promised. Just family. I looked at our little kitchen, the stack of takeout menus, the life we were building with 2 forks and a decent skillet, and something inside me shivered. Family. The word felt heavier than it had a minute earlier. Jason came home with flowers from the discount bucket and set them in a jar. He kissed my hair, asked about my day, and opened the fridge like always. Routine is a beautiful blanket. It also hides bruises. I told myself not to push, not to turn one quiet answer into a storm. Then I heard the smallest voice in my head ask, what if the storm already happened, and I'm just walking in after? I didn't press that night. I laughed at his dry joke about office snacks. We ate on the couch. We made waffles the next morning. But the air had shifted for me. Love had been steady. Now it had an echo. And once you hear an echo, you start wondering where the walls really are. Would you have asked, or would you have waited like I did? My phone buzzed before the kettle clicked off. My mom's voice poured through like sunshine and caffeine, already picturing a dance floor, a toast, the cousins who absolutely must come. I leaned against the counter, watching steam rise, and tried to match her excitement. She painted the night with twinkle lights and a DJ who knew how to read a room. I heard forks clink in the background. She was setting a table I could see without looking. It sounded warm. It also sounded like a stage. What is a wedding for, a show or a promise? Jason came home late, shoulders tired, knuckles red from the heavy bag at the gym. We ate Thai out of paper boxes, feet touching under the table. I told him my parents wanted to help, that they could cover most of it, that it mattered to them. He listened the way he always did, eyes steady, body still. Then he suggested a courthouse. Small. Clean. A quiet dinner after. He said it softly, like he was afraid of spooking something he wanted to keep. I asked why simple had to mean invisible. He said simple meant honest. He talked about saving, about trips we hadn't taken, about not spending money to impress people we hardly knew. All reasonable. All true. But the part that snagged me wasn't money, it was absence. The guest list in his voice sounded like a cleared field, no old roots, no wildflowers, no weeds. When I told my parents, the silence on the line wasn't silence. It was disappointment trying to stay polite. My mom shifted into generosity as if that would solve it. She offered to pay for the venue, the dress, the cake with 2 tears and restraint. My dad chimed in from the background with that pragmatic tone that doubles as love. A celebration, he said, is also about community. About standing up in front of your people and saying, this is who we are. I carried their hope home like a glass of water filled too high. Jason was folding laundry when I brought it up again, his careful stacks, my messy ones, 2 styles on one bed. I told him my parents could shoulder the cost, that it wouldn't fall on us, that it would make them happy. He paused with a t-shirt in his hands and didn't breathe for a beat. Then he said his family wouldn't be there. Not his mother. Not anyone. He said it without anger. Just final. I asked if they couldn't travel, or if timing was the issue, or if we could choose a day that made it easier. I was building a bridge with explanations he didn't ask for. He shook his head once. It wasn't about logistics. The door, he implied, was welded shut. He would not knock. He would not wait for footsteps on the other side. I tried another path. Maybe we invite friends who feel like family. He nodded. That fit the narrative he could live with. But when I asked about names, siblings, cousins, anyone, his jaw tightened in a way I felt in my own chest. He redirected to seating charts, to music that didn't scream over the conversation, to the upside of a short guest list. He spoke efficiently, like he was boxing shadows. That night my mom texted a photo of a simple ballroom with long wooden tables and soft lights that made everything look kind. I stared at my screen and saw 2 versions of us. In one, we're spinning on a crowded floor, faces flushed, my dad pretending he can dance, my mom crying into a napkin. In the other, we're under a courthouse skylight, the echo of our vows swallowed by tall walls, and the quiet gratitude of a handful of people who matter. Both were beautiful. Only one felt like it could hold a secret without cracking. Work blurred the next few days, emails, campaigns, deadlines that moved when you got close. At a team lunch, a coworker asked casually if we had set a date. I said we were keeping it small. She nodded in approval and added that she wished she had done the same, then asked about family travel headaches. My mouth moved before I could stop it. I said we didn't have many logistics to wrangle. The lie was small. It tasted metallic anyway. Back home, Jason washed dishes while I dried. The apartment hummed softly, that cozy frequency routine makes when it's working. I told him my parents still hoped for a celebration. He set a plate on the rack like it might break if he looked away. Then he said it plainly, like a diagnosis you can't bargain with. His parents would not attend under any circumstances. The words landed heavy and flat, like something that had been rehearsed for years. I reached for the softest question. Was it complicated? He almost smiled. That word didn't begin to cover it. He added that the fewer moving parts, the less likely anything would fall apart. I heard, the fewer people from my past, the safer my future. He dried his hands and touched my cheek, kind as ever. He asked me not to worry. He asked me to trust him. He asked for the one thing silence never earns. I lay awake later, staring at the faint city glow painting the ceiling. I tried to catalog my own family, the loud uncles, the cousins who bring dessert and drama, the aunts who believe appetizers are a love language. I felt that ache of wanting to merge worlds, to put his calm next to their noise, and let them balance each other. I also felt the chill of the way he said, under any circumstances. That's the kind of phrase you use when you've been burned enough times to smell smoke before anyone else. In the morning, he was back to normal: oatmeal, gym bag, kiss on the forehead. Routine wrapped us up like a blanket. I held it tight and listened underneath. There was a sound there I couldn't ignore anymore, a low thrum of something broken far away that still shook our walls. I told myself I would be patient, that he would open the door when he was ready. Then, while sorting receipts for a budget spreadsheet he asked me to review, I noticed the corner of an old envelope tucked between manuals in the glove compartment of his car. A name. A city. Indiana. My heartbeat climbed into my throat and stayed there. I put the envelope back exactly as I found it, hands trembling as if they belonged to someone else. I didn't confront him that night. I chopped vegetables. I laughed at a show. I lined up our shoes by the door. But a map had unfolded in my head, crisp and undeniable, and the road on it ran south. The engine turned over before dawn, a low growl inside a sleeping street. I had packed quietly: jeans, a sweater, a charger, the kind of bag you can deny if someone asks where you went. The night before, Jason left for a 3-day client visit, his kiss light, his schedule tight, his eyes grateful for routine. When the door closed, the apartment sounded too neat. That's when I slid the glove compartment open again and stared at the envelope. Denise Cole. Gary, Indiana. The ink had bled at the corners, like it had sweated through a summer. I copied the address, letter by letter, then put it back precisely, the way nurses smooth a sheet. My hands shook anyway. Was I crossing a line or finally drawing one? I told my parents I had errands. Groceries. Returns. The small lies that don't echo. My mom suggested we meet for lunch. I said I'd text later. My dad said to drive safe, voice casual, concern threaded through it. I held the phone a moment longer, tempted to spill everything. Instead, I placed it face down and locked the door behind me. Milwaukee dulled into highway, the sun burning through thin clouds. Semis breathed beside me, big and patient. Exit slipped past: Kenosha, Racine, names from weather maps and road reports. I kept both hands on the wheel and tried to organize my thoughts like a spreadsheet. Columns for love, trust, truth. Nothing balanced. The formulas returned errors. I replayed the moment I found the envelope, how my heartbeat made a ticking sound in my ears, how letters can look louder than they are. Denise. The name carried weight. It pressed against the walls inside his silence. The pieces tried to assemble themselves. No alcohol, no family, a welded door. Somewhere a hinge had rusted off. Indiana rose up over the state line with low factories and empty billboards. The sky felt bigger, but the air felt older, like it had been exhaled too many times. I stopped at a gas station with a flickering open sign, bought coffee that tasted like hot cardboard, and stared at a wall map that hadn't been updated in years. A taped arrow pointed to Lake. Another to downtown. My nail traced the grid toward Gary. It wasn't far. It didn't feel close. Back on the road, the lanes narrowed, and the scenery shifted from cornfields to concrete bones. Warehouses with missing teeth. Windows boarded like eyelids that refused to open. I turned the radio off and listened to the car. It made an honest sound. That helped. Jason's discipline started to make a different kind of sense at 60 miles an hour. The way he kept routine like a religion. The way he used control to build a fence around his life. Discipline isn't only about strength. Sometimes it's about containment. Sometimes it's about keeping ancient fires from touching new curtains. I imagined him younger, shoulders smaller, but already squared, making a choice I hadn't been forced to make: run or be swallowed. Maybe he ran north and never looked back. Maybe looking back felt like standing in a doorway with a house burning behind you while someone asked if you wanted cake. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A coworker sent a meme about meetings that should have been emails. I laughed out loud and then felt the laugh die. We shared jokes at desks while whole other worlds collapsed behind people's eyes. How many times had I judged his quiet and called it distance when it was actually a dam? Gary's sign appeared, a green rectangle with white letters that pretended they meant welcome. The streets widened into a map of loss. Bars with papered windows. A school with a broken swing that still moved in the wind. A dog trotted alone like it had somewhere to be. The GPS voice guided me toward the address I had memorized already. I passed a corner store where two boys argued softly over a lottery ticket. A woman in a red coat cracked a cigarette and watched my car like it might confess something. I rolled the window down an inch and tasted cold air mixed with smoke and lake water. The smell was familiar and not. It held metal and history. Names flashed on mailboxes, some printed, some scratched with keys. When I finally turned onto the street I needed, my breath forgot itself. The houses leaned like tired men at a bus stop. Porches sagged under old promises. A blue tarp flapped from a roof edge, stubborn and loud. It felt wrong to arrive and right to stop. Halfway down the block, I saw a small house with a crooked hand-painted name stuttering across a peeling mailbox. I didn't have to read it to know. I knew it the way you know your own handwriting from far away. The letters wobbled but held. I cut the engine and sat very still. The silence settled like dust, then thickened. Somewhere a TV blared, a laugh track muffled by thin walls. A bottle clinked on concrete. A woman's voice rose, then fell. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles matched the sky. This was the door he had welded shut. This was the hallway he refused to admit existed. I rested my forehead on the wheel and exhaled slowly, trying to temper the heat in my chest with air that felt too cold to belong to lungs. If I knocked, I couldn't unknock. If I walked away, I would keep walking for years. I reached for the handle and froze. Movement flickered in the dark window. A shape passed, then vanished, small and quick, like a thought you're afraid to finish. I lifted my head, wiped my palms on my jeans, and listened as my own heartbeat timed the distance between the life I knew and the one waiting on that porch. Would you have stepped out or stayed in the car one more minute? The porch complained under my shoes, a slow groan that sounded like warning. Cigarette butts crowded the steps like a small gravel of habits. A mailbox leaned out with coal, painted in shaky letters, the C drifting uphill, the E running out of paint. I knocked once, then again. The air smelled like cold metal and last night. Locks clattered. The door opened a few inches, caught by a chain. A woman's face appeared in the strip of shadow, stringy hair, eyes wet and mean, mouth collapsed around a sip that never ended. She clocked me in one hard glance, then closed the door, unhooked the chain, and opened it like a dare. Denise. I didn't need an introduction. The bottle in her hand told the rest. It was cheap gin with a broken label, beading with sweat though the day was cold. A TV laughed somewhere behind her, tinny and too loud, like someone trying to drown out their own thoughts. I said hello and offered my name. I said I was a friend of Jason's. Her face tightened at his name the way a knot tightens when it's pulled wrong. She didn't invite me in. She didn't tell me to leave. She stared at my shoes and asked if I was from a bill. The word company died in her throat and came out like a cough. I said I wasn't. I said I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. Her smile stretched, then snapped. She accused me of checking up on her. She accused me of being here to take something. People who have been stripped of a lot see thieves everywhere. The door frame was scarred at hip height, a line of pale wood where paint had worn off from years of leaning. The air inside the house pushed out in waves, old smoke, sour liquor, a sweetness that wasn't sweet at all. A refrigerator hummed like it was trying to calm the room down and failing. Behind her, a young voice cut through the laugh track. It was clear, sharp, the kind of voice kids use when they're tired of being treated like furniture. Stop lying, it said from the dark hall. She's not from a bill. She's here because of Jason. The sound pulled my eyes past Denise to the hallway where a girl stood half in shadow. Mia. 13 staring like 30. Jeans a size too small at the ankle. Sneakers too clean in the toe and scuffed everywhere else, the kind you get new once, then make last too long. Hair yanked into a ponytail by someone in a hurry who didn't care if it hurt. Her arms were crossed, but her jaw was loose in a way that said she learned not to cry where her mother could see it. Denise turned to snap at her, the bottle tilting dangerously. She told the girl to mind her own business. She told me I had no right to be on her porch. Then, like she remembered old rules about manners from another life, she softened for a second and said Jason was good to them. Her mouth mangled the words, "he helps." The sentence sagged under the weight of everything he couldn't fix. Mia stepped forward 2 paces, enough for the light to find her face. She asked who I was to him. Fiancé felt big in my mouth, so I said I was someone who loved him. That was simpler and more accurate. Her eyes flicked to the bottle, then to my hands, then back to my face, measuring me like a safe crossing. The house revealed itself in fragments behind them, 2 pairs of shoes without laces, a coat rack missing hooks, a faded backpack collapsed in a corner. A Christmas tinsel strand still taped to the wall even though the calendar had long moved on. Evidence of holidays that tried and failed. Denise swung from defensive to mean and back again, a pendulum fueled by gin. She bragged that Jason sent money. She sneered that it was never enough. She claimed he thought he was better than them now. Then she said he had always been too soft for this neighborhood, like kindness was a weakness bones could break around. Every sentence contradicted the last. Every sentence felt true anyway. When she took a step closer, I caught the full scent of her stale sweat, drugstore perfume, and that sharp ethanol edge that burns your throat just from standing near it. It was a smell that made me understand why Jason's no to alcohol wasn't about health. It was about history. It was about refusing to taste a room that had tried to swallow him. Mia's gaze slid to my left hand. She noticed the ring, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself. Something in her face softened, then hardened again like it was trained to. She said the coat Jason bought her last winter had been borrowed. Her tone made the word dirty. She pointed at the corner where a space hung on a hook like a missing tooth. She said she walked to school without it until a teacher sent her to the nurse's closet for a donated one. She said it plainly, no drama, like weather. Denise barked that Mia was ungrateful, that winter wasn't even that bad, that people in the neighborhood were jealous of them because they had each other. The bottle tipped, caught steadied. Fear flashed across Mia's face so fast it felt like a camera glitch, but the image stuck. It was the look kids get when they know the rules change mid-sentence. I told Denise I wasn't here to judge. I said I wanted to make sure Mia was safe. She laughed, a brittle chime that didn't reach her eyes, and told me to leave before someone called the cops for loitering. Then she threatened to call herself, which made Mia snort in a way that said the phone worked only when it benefited the bottle. I apologized, an instinct you carry from polite homes, then regretted it immediately. Why was I apologizing for wanting a child to have a coat? Denise stepped back to swing the door. The chain clinked against wood, impatient. The TV inside suddenly spiked in volume as if the room was resisting silence. Mia met my eyes one last time. There was no plea in them, just a question I couldn't translate, something between "are you real" and "will you come back?" The porch light above us chose that moment to flicker, then hold steady, a cheap halo that made everything look more tired. Denise told me again to get off her property, the word property, arriving chipped and dented. I nodded, because fighting her on a threshold wasn't going to save anyone. I backed down the steps, careful where the wood dipped. The cold hit harder down on the sidewalk, clean and honest, and I breathed it like medicine. Behind me the door slammed, a flat, final sound. The house swallowed their voices whole. A curtain shifted and stilled. I stood there with my hands empty and my chest crowded. What kind of mother trades a child's safety for another bottle? I turned toward the car, keys cold in my fist, when motion flashed at the side of the house. A small form slipped through a narrow gate, fast and practiced, sneakers whispering over dead leaves. Mia. She didn't look back. She ran like a plan she'd rehearsed, ponytail snapping once in the air, then disappearing down the block. I should have driven away. I should have called someone official and waited in the safe part of town where coffee has foam and rules have teeth. but my feet were already moving. I followed, not too close, trying to keep my breath quiet, as if she could hear my promise from 50 feet back. I didn't know where she was going. I only knew the house behind us wasn't it. She sprinted like she knew every crack in the sidewalk. I followed, not chasing, shadowing, giving her the space people never gave her at home. The block thinned into a strip of bars and a mini-mart with a buzzing light that kept losing its nerve. She cut left at the alley, then right, then vanished behind a squat brick building scarred with graffiti that looked like names trying to climb out of paint. I didn't want to spook her. I ducked into the mini-mart, bought an odd little care package, chips, granola bars, 2 candy sticks, and a bottle of water, and stepped back into air that tasted like rust and winter. When I rounded the corner, I saw her again, smaller now, moving down a narrow path cut through scrub toward a canal that fed the lake. The wind off the water licked my face and pressed my jacket flat. Somewhere a gull cried like a door hinge. She stopped on a low concrete ledge and stared at the gray chop. Arms crossed. Jaw tight. The kind of posture you use when you don't want to be moved again. I slowed my steps so she could hear me coming, no surprises, hands visible, like the world had taught her to audit danger before it reached her. I set the bag of snacks beside her and didn't sit yet. I told her it was just food. No strings. No lecture. Her eyes flicked to the bag, then to my face, trying to read if I was the kind of adult who adds a debt to a kindness. She took the water first, cracked it, drank in short, controlled pulls, like she didn't trust the bottle to stay. I sat a foot away, not closer. We let silence do the heavy lifting. The canal made a soft slap against the concrete, somewhere between a heartbeat and a warning. My knees started to shake from the cold or the adrenaline. I couldn't tell which. She ate a chip, then another, the bag crinkling like fragile paper in a quiet room. I told her my name again and that I was with Jason. I didn't use labels. I said he mattered to me and I wanted to understand. She snorted at the word understand, like it was a tourist word. Then she asked, not curious, more like cross-examining, how did I know him? What did I know about him? Did he tell me about Gary? About Denise? I answered what I could. I described the life we had, small apartment, Sunday waffles, the way he never drank, not once, and watched her eyes track every detail like she was sorting truth from performance. When I said he trained at a gym instead of happy hours, something in her face softened and then reset, like a muscle remembering a shape and letting it go. She tried the granola bar next, chewed slow, eyes back on the water. From this angle the town looked like a broken jaw, buildings missing teeth, bridges that had been fixed and unfixed a dozen times. She asked me why I followed her. The question wasn't a test. It was an accusation she was prepared to live with. I told her the truth in small pieces. That I walked into the house and felt something wrong. That I saw her run and couldn't pretend I hadn't. That sometimes grown-ups do nothing because doing something might change their own plans, and I was trying not to be that kind of grown-up. The wind lifted her ponytail. She didn't move otherwise. She said Denise would call me a thief for bringing food, that tomorrow the lie would turn into a story about how I stole from them. The way she said it made it clear. In that house, reality belonged to whoever spoke last and loudest. I asked if she had a safe adult at school. She shrugged with just one shoulder, maybe a counselor, maybe a teacher, but their hands were tied unless something really bad happened. Her tone said the bar for really bad was higher than most people could imagine. A train sighed in the distance and pulled the sound of the world behind it. I noticed a reddish indentation at her wrist where a too-tight hair tie had lived all day. I noticed a stitch missing on the cuff of her sleeve, little threads curled like smoke. I kept my voice even and asked if Jason knew things were this rough. She didn't answer, which was an answer. She asked if Jason talked about a brother. The word snagged in my chest. I said he never did. Not once. She looked at the water for a long beat, then said, almost to herself, that people leave in different ways. Some walk out the door. Some move into a new life and pretend the old address never existed. It sounded like a sentence she'd tried out before. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, careful not to crowd her. I told her I wasn't here to drag Jason back to a house that hurt him. I was here because I loved him, and I couldn't love him honestly while ignoring her. The statement surprised me as much as her. Some truths only arrive when you say them out loud. She finally looked at me straight on. Her eyes were older than her face. She asked again, slower this time, each word weighed. Why did you follow me? The wind paused. The canal went quiet, as if it wanted to hear the answer too. I could have said curiosity. I could have said fear. I chose something closer to the center. I told her I followed because I needed to know what Jason was running from if I was going to run with him for the rest of my life. She blinked once, like the sentence landed, and pushed something aside. She slid the chips toward me, an awkward peace offering or maybe a test of trust. I took one and let the salt wake my mouth. The gull cried again. A car passed on the bridge above, tires hissing like a whisper we couldn't catch. She took a breath that trembled at the edges and settled. The pose she'd held since the porch loosened by a degree you might miss if you weren't watching. Then she tilted her head toward the water, not at me, and spoke in a voice that aimed for flat but couldn't help shaking. Okay, she said. Then listen. She didn't look at me when she began. She watched the water and talked like a person reading names off a wall. No drama. Just facts that had teeth. There used to be 4 of them. Jenna first, out early, married into chaos that looked like freedom at the time. Jason next, quiet, fast, hands always busy, gone to Milwaukee the moment school would let him. Aaron after that, funny, solid, the kind of boy teachers trusted with keys. Then Mia, the afterthought everyone said was a surprise, like a storm that shows up on a blue sky day. Denise drank through everything: birthdays, report cards, holidays that smelled like aluminum pans and liquor. She'd sell school supplies for cash, trade new shoes for a week of bottles, promise to quit on Sunday and forget by Monday. Jason kept coming back on weekends with groceries, gift cards, and that careful smile he wore like a lid. He'd stock the fridge and hide a few bills behind the spices, hoping they'd turn into breakfast instead of vodka. Sometimes it worked. Mostly it didn't. Mia nudged a stone into the canal with her shoe. The plop was small and clean. She said the winter it got bad, Denise was with a man named Rick Torres. Rick drank like it was his job and got mean when the bottle got low. He had opinions about everything and money for nothing. He had that swagger that looks like confidence, Mia said, until you learn the difference. Jason showed up less then. Not because he didn't try. Because every time he brought something, it vanished. Coats pawned. Sneakers borrowed. Groceries turned into empties on the stoop by Tuesday. He mailed gift cards instead, then cash, then nothing for a month when Denise called him ungrateful for sending the wrong brand. That was the month Mia learned how loneliness can be quiet and loud at the same time. She told me about the night like she had folded it into 10 sentences she could survive. It was late. The heat failed again. The stove door was cracked to warm the kitchen, blue flame licking metal. Denise and Rick were fighting money, always, and the soundtrack was a TV game show turned up high to drown out real life. Mia sat at the table doing homework under a dying bulb because the library had closed and the assignments still existed. The argument moved from the couch to the kitchen. A bottle tipped, shattered, spread a wet map under the table. Denise grabbed Rick's sleeve. He shoved her shoulder, not hard, not gentle, the way men do when they want to prove a point without leaving a bruise. Denise swung back sloppy and mean. The stove hissed. The TV laughed at the wrong time. Aaron stepped in like he always did. He was 18 and built like a promise. He told Rick to get out, voice even, hands open, a boy who had practiced de-escalation in a house that never learned it. Rick went still in that artificial calm drunks get right before the break. He reached for the counter. Mia didn't see the knife until it was in his hand because the light blinked at that exact second, like the room didn't want to be a witness. She said the lunge was short and stupid. The kind you replay because it makes no sense. 2 movements, maybe 3. A sound that wasn't a sound at all, more like air giving up. Aaron fell against the cabinet and slid down like he was sitting to rest. His eyes found Mia's like he'd remembered something important, then moved to Denise and didn't move back. Mia's voice dropped there. She said the sirens took forever, though clocks later swore they didn't. She said she pressed a dish towel to a place that wouldn't stop darkening. She said Denise kept saying Rick didn't mean it, that he was just upset, words that landed like glass underfoot. Rick ran. The stove kept hissing. The TV audience applauded somebody else's jackpot. The room chose noise over reality because reality was too big. She told me there was blood on the homework page, a math problem with an answer she could never write again without shaking. She told me Denise cried only when the police asked hard questions, then fell asleep on the couch while Mia rode to the hospital in the back of a car that smelled like old coffee and cold vinyl. We sat with that for a while. The wind pushed the canal into small, angry waves and then let it smooth. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, steady and wrong at the same time. Where do kids learn to carry loss like homework? Mia said after the funeral, the house turned meaner. People came with food and opinions, and then they left. Denise used Aaron's picture like a shield or a spear depending on the day. Rick disappeared, then reappeared in stories where he was both monster and victim, whichever got her more sympathy or cash. The neighbors learned to keep their heads down. The school counselor called once, twice, and then put Mia on a list that felt like a waiting room for emergencies. She picked up the candy stick and didn't eat it, just rolled it between her fingers like a fuse she wasn't sure she should light. Her voice went softer. She said Jason stopped coming by after that. Not stopped caring, stopped showing up. He sent money sometimes. He sent messages sometimes. He asked about grades, about coats, about anything that could be measured. But he didn't sleep under that roof again. He ran, she said, not angry, just accurate. He ran north and built a life where knives were only in kitchens. I looked at the water and tasted metal. My mind jumped to his hands in our sink, the way he dried plates like they might break if he moved too fast. Him saying no to champagne without a second thought. Him locking his past like a door I had finally opened. Mia kept her eyes on the horizon and added the part she'd been saving for last. Jason, her steady, controlled brother, still believes it's his fault. She didn't say why. She didn't have to. The sentence hung between us, heavy as a storm cloud. She slid the candy back into the bag like she was returning something she couldn't afford. You wanted to understand, she said, voice flat again. That's the shape of it. The gull screamed overhead and veered away. I nodded because words felt clumsy. She stood, small and fierce against a gray sky, and asked if I was still going to marry him. I opened my mouth and found only breath. She didn't wait for an answer. He'll never tell you this, she said, starting up the path. But he thinks he should have been there. She paused, looked back once, and then kept walking. Her footsteps faded. The canal slapped the concrete like a clock. I sat very still and felt our wedding plans rearrange themselves around a boy who never came home. The wind shifted and Mia kept talking, words steady as the gray water. She said Jason was supposed to be there that weekend. He had promised Aaron he'd come down with groceries and a space heater that actually worked. Then an ice storm iced over I-94 like a glass lid. Plows crawled, semi-stacked. News anchors used the word impassable like a spell. He called. He said he'd try in the morning. Morning never came the way he wanted. She said he still believes the storm was an excuse, not a fact. If he'd left earlier. If he'd pushed harder. If he'd broken the rules the way pain breaks right through. Guilt doesn't care about weather. It rewrites maps and removes exits. At the funeral, Jason didn't whisper. He stood at the casket like a man carrying a door on his back and told Denise the truth she drinks to forget. That her choices opened the house to men like Rick. That a knife didn't just appear, it arrived on a road she paved. People stared at their shoes. People always stare at their shoes when honesty gets bloody. He refused to sleep in that house again. He meant it. He came back once at noon when the neighbors were loud and the sun was nosy. He packed in silence, hands moving like they were at work, efficient, controlled, gentle with things no one had been gentle with. He took his old trophies, 2 hoodies, a photograph where Aaron is laughing with a mouthful of cake. He slid a folded envelope under a loose board in Mia's room, bank details, her name on it, tiny and powerful, and told her to memorize where it lived. For school, he said. For emergencies. She was 10. She nodded like a soldier. Then he turned to Denise and gave her the only mercy he had left, a warning shaped like a promise. If another violent man crossed that threshold, he'd call the police first and child services second, and he wouldn't wait for permission. The room tried to laugh at him. The room failed. Even drunk, the house could hear steel. Word traveled the block the way word always travels, through back doors and cracked windows. Men who confuse fear with respect learned a new equation. Jason didn't stop by after that. He didn't need to. Distance did the work while his anger cooled into something harder than fire. He sent money when he could. Grocery cards. A pair of sneakers for Mia that actually fit. He texted to check grades, to ask about science fairs and gym class, using ordinary words to hold a life together from another zip code. Sometimes she answered. Sometimes Denise lost the phone. Sometimes silence arrived like a fog and stayed until morning. Mia said he never once brought a new girlfriend to Gary. He never brought anyone. The past was a locked boiler room in the basement of his life. He kept the door bolted and stacked furniture in front of it. In Milwaukee, he talked about spreadsheets, not brothers. He joked about office snacks, not knives. He jogged in the dark and slept in shorter bursts than most men, waking at small sounds as if the night might have rules he refused to trust. She glanced at me then, quick, testing. He won't tell you any of this, she said. He thinks silence is how you keep people safe. The sentence sat between us like a cold tool. What do you do with love that comes carrying a ghost? I pictured him the night the storm hit, hands on a useless steering wheel, radio hissing school closings, mouth tight enough to split. I pictured him turning back, because turning back was the only legal choice, then swallowing that choice like glass for years. It isn't weakness to obey the weather. Try telling that to a man who learned survival by overriding pain. Mia's voice dropped to a thread. She said the day after the funeral, Jason told her 2 rules. School first. Call him second. If the house went bad, she was to take the alley, go to the corner store, and ask to use the phone. Tell them it's me, he said. They'll know. She believed him because when he says something simple, it's carved, not spoken. She stopped there and studied the end of the candy stick like it might offer a third rule nobody had taught her. The wind found us again and pressed its hand against our backs. Her shoulders twitched once, like a shiver she decided not to have. I heard myself say I was sorry, and the words sounded thin next to a life like hers. I switched to what mattered. I told her I wasn't here to drag Jason backward. I was here to decide whether our future could hold the truth without cracking. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She handed me a fact instead. He'll think this is his fault forever if you let him. We walked back toward the street in slow steps, the path narrow enough to force single file. At the corner, she stopped and gave me a number written on a torn receipt. It wasn't her phone. It was the mini-mart. Ask for Luis if I'm not there, she said, voice brisk, like business. That tiny network, one brother's threat, one clerk's loyalty, felt stronger than half the safety nets I grew up believing in. Before we split, I asked the last hard thing. Was Denise sober today typical or lucky? Mia snorted without humor. Typical. Lucky is when she's sleeping. The answer lodged under my ribs like a stone I'd carry home. I drove north while the sky untied itself from the lake, my hands at 10 and 2, my jaw sore from clenching. The apartment waited where we'd left it, clean counters, neat shoes, a jar of flowers trying their best. I stood in our quiet kitchen and understood his rituals like I hadn't before. Every folded towel. Every early morning. Every no to alcohol. They weren't quirks. They were a security system. My phone lit with a text from my mom about venue options and twinkle lights. I stared at the screen and saw Mia's 2 short sleeves, Aaron's cake smile, Jason's hands placing a photograph into a box he carried alone. I loved him. I loved him more for the broken map he refused to show me. Love like that doesn't ask for a bigger cake. It asks for a bigger spine. I typed and deleted and typed again. My reflection in the black glass looked like someone deciding to become a different kind of adult than she planned. Silence might keep Jason safe. It would not keep Mia safe. It would not keep us honest. I set the phone down, palms flat on the counter, and listened to the refrigerator hum. Somewhere below that steady sound, I heard the echo from Gary, low and constant, a reminder disguised as noise. I knew what I needed to do next. Would you have done the same? I drove north with the heater on full and a plan getting louder. The lake slipped by like steel. My hands stayed at 10 and 2 while my mind rewrote everything: guest list, vows, the shape of family. Love used to mean waffles and soft lamps. Today it meant facing the cold and not looking away. Would you marry someone and ignore his sister? That evening my parents served comfort on plates: roast chicken, green beans, the smell of butter softening the edges of the room. I put my fork down and told them I didn't want a ballroom, a band, or a delicate seating chart. I wanted a courthouse, a small dinner, and one non-negotiable: Mia at our table. My mom blinked, then reached for a napkin like she already knew tears were on the way. My dad leaned back, face careful, asking for facts. I told them I'd driven to Gary. I told them about the porch, the bottle, the 2 short sleeves, and the canal that swallowed the sound of a child's voice. I told them Jason had been holding up a roof from another city and blaming himself for not being a beam. My mom's hand found mine across the table. She said we could make room. My dad asked the hard questions: school, custody, the law, and then nodded, slow and steady, the way bridges say yes. They offered money for whatever mattered and time for everything else. I went home with leftovers and courage. The apartment smelled like clean soap and our detergent, that quiet proof of a life. Jason was back early, gym bag by the door, shoulders tight from driving. He smiled when he saw me, then stopped when he saw my face. He asked if I was okay. I said no, and that I loved him, and that we needed to talk now, not later. I told him I went to Gary. The word landed like a plate on tile, loud, sharp, and not fixable with quick hands. He froze, then turned away, breath catching once like a pulled punch. He asked if I was followed. He asked if anyone hurt me. He didn't ask why, because he already knew. I told him about Denise's door and Mia's eyes. I told him about the coat that went missing and the math page with blood that still exists even when you turn off every light. I kept my voice low and even, the way you talk to a burn. He paced once around the table, then stopped and pressed his palms to the counter like he was bracing for a wave. He said I shouldn't have gone. I said I couldn't build a life with him and pretend his sister was a rumor. He said he was handling it. I said handling is not the same as saving. The silence after that sentence rang in the air like a bell nobody wanted to claim. Something in him cracked without sound. He sat, elbows on knees, and finally looked at me straight on. He said Aaron's name for the first time, soft and wrecked, and told me he should have been there, storm or not. I told him weather is not a moral failure. I told him guilt isn't a plan. He swallowed hard, jaw working like he was chewing glass. Then he whispered that he had spent years trying to keep me separate from the smoke. I moved to the floor in front of him and took his hands. I told him separation isn't safety if a child is still standing in the fire. We could stay small and clean together, or we could get real and get brave. I said I chose brave. His eyes flooded fast and then cleared, like a system finally flushing. He asked what I wanted. I said a courthouse wedding with the people who actually show up in our life. I said Mia sits with us, eats with us, and walks into our photos. I said after that, we start the guardianship process and don't stop until she has a door with her name on it and no chain on the other side. The room went very, very quiet. Then he nodded once, the kind of nod that changes routes, not moods. He got up, walked to the bedroom, and came back with a thin envelope already addressed to a law office. His hand shook as he set it down. He said he had asked a coworker for a referral weeks ago and kept the documents hidden like a superstition. Start the process, then maybe never need it. He hadn't mailed them. He didn't know if he deserved to. I slid the envelope back toward him. I said we deserved to try, and Mia deserved adults who didn't flinch. He let out a breath that sounded like surrender and relief braided together. He said one more thing, voice rough. If Denise fought, it could get ugly. I said if she didn't, that would say everything too. Either way, we would show up calm, prepared, and unafraid of paperwork. We made tea we didn't drink and stood at the window while the city pushed past our block, indifferent and alive. He rested his forehead against mine and whispered that he was sorry for the secrets and grateful for the truth. I told him this wasn't punishment, it was a door. He said he was ready to walk through. We sat at the table and made a list: courthouse date, guest count, Mia's dress size, lawyer's number, documents to gather, school contacts to call. The list looked ordinary and felt like a rescue plan. When we finished, he folded it once and tucked it in his wallet like a vow. I turned off the kitchen light and the apartment settled. In the dark, I could still see the canal, the porch, and a girl holding herself together because no one else would. Tomorrow we'd call child services. Tonight we lay very still, between fear and resolve, waiting for our courage to carry into morning. The courthouse steps felt taller than they were. Morning sun hit the stone and bounced back into our eyes, turning the whole block into a soft glare. My shoes squeaked once on the lobby floor, that tiny sound that says you're about to do something permanent. We checked in. We sat on a wooden bench that had seen 100 vows and 1,000 nerves. Mia swung her feet, pretending not to stare at the couples filing past. Was I ready to say yes to all of it, not just the part with rings? The clerk called our names. The room was simple: flag, seal, polished wood that smelled faintly like lemon oil. Judge Alvarez read our names in a voice that carried and didn't echo. My hands were steady until I looked at Jason. His hands weren't. He locked eyes with me and breathed once, the kind that resets a body. When we said our vows, they came out small and clean. No audience. No performance. Just the truth in plain clothes. I slid the ring onto his finger and felt something unhook in my chest, a knot I'd been tightening for months without noticing. He whispered thank you without moving his lips. The judge smiled softly and stamped the papers with a heavy thunk that sounded like the start of a foundation. You're married, she said, and it felt both enormous and calm. Outside, the wind was gentler, as if it had read the paperwork. We walked 2 blocks to a diner with chrome stools and the kind of menu that has pictures because the food is exactly what it claims to be. We crammed into a corner booth, me, Jason, my parents, 2 coworkers who had quietly become family, and Mia, tucked in beside me like she was testing a new seat. The waitress clocked our flowers and our faces and guessed right. She brought coffee, then pie with congrats scribbled in chocolate syrup like a kid had signed it. We ordered like we were celebrating breakfast: pancakes, eggs, a burger for Jason because nerves need protein. My mom slipped Mia a small box with a simple necklace inside. Mia touched it once and then hid it under her shirt like it was a secret she wanted to keep. My dad told a short, awkward toast that made Jason laugh in a way that loosened the whole table. When it was Jason's turn, he stared at the fork in his hand like it was a cue card, then put it down and told the truth. He said he never expected to stand at a table like this. He said peace had always felt like something other people got to have. He looked at Mia, swallowed, and said that having her here meant more than any ballroom ever could. His voice cracked once. He let it. No one looked away. The waitress pretended to refill water and smiled into the pitcher. My phone buzzed with a text from our attorney, timing that felt like a nudge. The intake packet had been received. If we could make it, he had a slot tomorrow to start the guardianship process and loop in child services early. I showed Jason the screen. He went very still, then nodded like a man accepting an assignment he'd been training for his whole life. After lunch, we spilled onto the sidewalk. The city hummed around us, indifferent and perfect. My mom hugged Mia like she'd done it for years, then backed off to give her air. Mark shook Jason's hand the way fathers do when they mean welcome. The coworkers took a few photos, nothing staged, just proof that joy can fit on a sidewalk. In the quiet that followed, Jason pulled an envelope from his jacket, the one I'd seen last night, now sealed and addressed. His fingers shook, but not from fear, more like release. He said he had another set of forms inside for a background check, home inspection, references, the whole stack people hate until they need it. He looked at me and asked if we were still in. I told him we had never been more in. We drove Mia back to Gary because that was the rule for now. She didn't say much. She traced the window fog with one finger and watched the drawings vanish when the heater did its job. At her curb, Denise didn't appear. The porch looked the same, which was its own kind of statement. Mia zipped her new coat to her chin and tucked the necklace under the collar. She met my eyes and said she'd be ready for tomorrow. Then she added, almost too quiet to hear, that she wasn't counting on it. I told her to count on us instead. Back home, we spread the documents across the table like maps. The list was long: birth certificates, pay stubs, letters from people who could vouch for who we were when no one was looking. My parents volunteered their pens before we asked. Jason called the attorney. I called the caseworker. We booked the first visit. The calendar filled with boxes that didn't care about nerves. When the house finally went quiet, Jason stood by the window and watched nothing in particular. He said he didn't feel like running anymore. I said good, because running wouldn't help me a peck. He smiled, tired and something better than tired. He asked if I was scared. I said yes, but not of the work, of the parts we couldn't control. We slept like people who'd been carrying a door and finally set it down. Morning would bring forms and interviews and a case number with a dash in it. It would also bring the first official question from people who decide these things for a living. Are we a stable home, or just two good intentions in a neat apartment? And somewhere in Gary, a porch light would flicker and a woman with a bottle might decide to fight or vanish. Which way would the scales tip? 3 knocks changed the shape of our living room. The caseworker stood in the doorway with a clipboard and a practical smile, the kind professionals wear when they've seen everything twice. Jason offered coffee. She took water. She looked at the smoke alarms, the locks, the windows that actually closed. She asked about routines. I told her about Sunday waffles and homework at the table and the way we keep a spare key with our neighbors because safety needs backups. Mia moved in like a careful echo. First a toothbrush, then a stack of spiral notebooks, then a hoodie that swallowed her hands. She slept under a new comforter and didn't unwrap the extra blanket for a week, like she didn't trust warmth to be permanent. We walked to the corner to pick out a backpack that didn't fall apart under the idea of school. She asked if the bus stop would still be safe after. After what? After the world decided who belonged where. Child Services asked the questions that mattered. Who pays which bills? Who cooks? Who checks math? Who shows up when the nurse calls? We answered in simple sentences, the way truth prefers to travel. Linda and Mark wrote letters about my stubborn streak and Jason's steadiness, about how love looks when no one is posing for photos. 2 coworkers sent notes that sounded like reference checks and felt like vows. This man leaves early, arrives early, and he keeps promises. Mia's counselor sent an email about a girl who kept showing up even when the world taught her not to. Denise didn't appear for the first meeting. Or the second. When they finally reached her, she slurred something about being busy and said Jason was dramatic. She didn't file anything. She didn't call back. Absence wrote its own letter. We went to the courthouse with folders that clicked when we opened them. The hallways smelled like lemon cleaner and nerves. Judge Alvarez looked over the edge of her glasses and asked Mia if she felt safe with us. Mia said yes without looking at me because she was learning the difference between need and performance. The judge flipped a page. She asked Jason how he planned to handle school, health, the ordinary emergencies that undo people at random. He answered like a man presenting a plan he'd written into his bones, doctor's appointments booked, counselor looped in, neighbor on speed dial. His work hours shifted 2 days a week. The judge read quietly for a long minute. It felt like waiting for weather to change. Then she nodded, steady and final, and said the words my chest had been bracing for, petition granted. Her gavel didn't bang. It clicked softly like a lid sealing. Papers slid across the desk. Mia held them like they might fly away, eyes fixed on the seal like it could melt if she blinked. Outside the building, we stood in weak autumn sun that pretended to be stronger than it was. Mia hugged the folder to her chest. Jason didn't speak. He stared at the cement, at the cracks that ran like maps under our feet, and exhaled something I'd never seen him let go of in public, Shame, maybe, or the idea that he didn't deserve a stamp that said yes. The apartment adjusted to 3 people like a muscle remembering an old movement. We added hooks by the door and a chair for homework and a calendar where school concerts and caseworker visits can share a square without fighting. Mia learned where this cereal lives. She learned that our fridge never grows empties overnight. She learned that sometimes I cry at commercials and Jason pretends not to notice. We learned that she reads late and hates gym days and relaxes most when the dryer is running because that hum sounds like a safe house. One night, she left a sheet of paper on the table and walked away. A math problem ghosted by old stains, edges wrinkled from being folded and unfolded. I didn't touch it. Jason did. He held it the way people hold letters they can't unread. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, as if confessing to the page, that he should have been there. I said the storm doesn't care about heroes. He nodded without agreement. Some beliefs are glaciers. You don't melt them with one warm breath. November slid in under the door. We drove south on a Saturday with a bouquet of pale lilies wrapped in paper and silence. The cemetery sat on a hill that made the wind feel colder than the sky had promised. Gravel cracked under our shoes like bones remembering. We found Aaron's name carved into stone that didn't look like him at all. That's the thing about graves, no face, just facts. Jason knelt first, hands shaking the way they had the day we married. He spoke in the low register he uses when he's telling the truth he hates. He said he was sorry for the storm and the roads, and every minute he wasn't standing between a knife and a boy who deserved years. He said he had carried that night like a door across his shoulders, and he didn't know how to put it down without letting Mia get wet. He said Rachel is stronger than I knew, and I'm letting her be strong. He said Mia is home now. He said I couldn't save you. I will save her. I placed the lilies at the base of the stone, the paper crackling like a quiet applause. I told Aaron a stranger's truth, that weather isn't cowardice and survival isn't betrayal. I said we would live with his name intact, not as a warning, but as a compass. I kept my voice even because grief respects a steady hand. Mia stepped closer and set her palm on Jason's shoulder, small and certain. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The 3 of us stood in a triangle that felt like architecture, load-bearing, balanced by more than hope. Snow started without warning, thin and soft, the kind that makes the world listen. It stuck in Jason's hair and on the lilies and on the curve of the stone, and I watched his face loosen in the quiet way men's faces do when they're alone with pain and decide not to be. He exhaled, a long surrender, and whispered a sentence loud enough for the hill to hear. I forgive myself. It wasn't dramatic. It was exact. The wind changed a notch. The cold felt cleaner. We walked back to the car through the soft fall of it, the world briefly kinder for no reason at all. Mia slid into the back seat and buckled up without being asked. Jason stared out the windshield at nothing, then at me, then at his own hands, like he was meeting them for the first time. He took my fingers and squeezed once. Not a promise. A presence. We drove home quiet, the heater working, the wipers tapping out a rhythm we could live with. Milwaukee rose up, not as an escape, but as a place you choose. Streetlights, diner signs, the brass of a city that forgives people who try. At a red light, Mia asked if we could make waffles tomorrow. Jason said we could. I said we should. The light changed. We moved. Inside, the apartment felt smaller and warmer and entirely ours. Mia hung her coat on her hook without looking for permission. Jason set the lilies in a glass of water like the grave might appreciate a second bouquet. I folded the court papers into the file we keep near the good scissors and the batteries that actually work. It looked like a family drawer. Before bed, I stood in the hallway and listened, the refrigerator hum, the dryer's easy spin, Mia's pencil scratching a last problem, Jason rinsing plates in the sink like always. Ordinary sounds, finally right. Isn't that the goal? Not fireworks. Not absolution from the sky. Just a home that hums, a future that doesn't flinch, a past that can be told without burning the room. I turned out the light. Snow worked quietly at the window. In the dark, Aaron's name didn't vanish. It moved into the place where love stores what it refuses to forget. Jason's breath evened beside me. Mia's door clicked once and settled. The house held. He forgave himself. We drove home in the quiet we'd earned.